Ever have one of those moments where someone pushes you just a bit too far? Well, my HOA didn't just push me. They practically tried to shove me off a cliff. My story begins with a small, cozy cabin, my own private slice of heaven, hidden deep in the woods. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I spent years building it with my own two hands. Every log and every nail stood as proof of my effort and dedication. It was my escape, my sanctuary. Then the HOA, this newly formed group of power-hungry busy bodies, showed up. They strutted in with clipboards and smug smiles, informing me that my cabin, which had existed long before their precious association ever came into being, was now considered a violation. Apparently, my rustic dream didn't match their new polished vision for the neighborhood. They handed me a letter. My stomach dropped as I read it. I had 72 hours. 72 hours to sell my cabin, sell it, or they would tear it down and send me the bill for it. I was in shock. My home, my life's work, was being threatened by a committee that had appeared out of nowhere. I tried to reason with them. I showed them my property deeds, explained the history of my land, how it existed long before their entire development. They just smirked. The head of the board, a man named Mr. Henderson, looked at me like I was nothing more than a nuisance he was about to eliminate. Rules are rules, he said, puffing out his chest. Your shack is an eyesore, and it's going. Sell it or lose it. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I would just roll over and accept it. They couldn't have been more wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. The anger burned in my chest like fire. Sell my cabin, the place where I'd watch my kids grow up, where I planned to spend my retirement. Not a chance. If they wanted to play hardball, then I was bringing something bigger. I spent the entire night digging through county records, zoning maps, and property laws. My anger drove a relentless, caffeine-fueled search. And that's when I found it, a tiny, overlooked detail, a golden opportunity, a loophole so perfect it almost made me laugh. It turned out the land their brand new HOA office sat on didn't actually belong to them. It was a small, forgotten parcel owned by an out-of-state company that had gone bankrupt years ago. The county had seized it over unpaid taxes, and it was scheduled for a public auction, an auction that was happening in less than 24 hours. A beautifully wicked plan started forming in my mind. Mr. Henderson wanted my land? Fine, I was going to take his. The next morning, I drove 3 hours to the county courthouse. The auction itself was dull, filled with developers and investors in cheap suits. Not a single person from the HOA showed up. They were too arrogant to even consider that their precious office might not be on solid ground. The parcel finally came up for bidding. It was a tiny piece of land, barely a quarter acre, seemingly worthless to anyone who didn't know what was sitting on it. The bidding started low. My heart pounded in my chest. I kept my face completely neutral, placing my bids calmly. In the end, I won. For a ridiculously small amount, I became the proud owner of the land beneath the HOA's feet. With the deed in hand, I drove back with a grin I couldn't hide. The 72-hour deadline was almost up. I could picture them getting ready to send in the bulldozers. But I had something else planned. I arrived just as Mr. Henderson and his group were gathered outside my cabin, looking confident. I walked right past them without saying a word and drove straight to their office. Using the key to my new property gate, I parked my old rusty pickup truck directly in front of the only entrance to their building. Then, just to make it official, I chained the gate shut and put up a brand new, very official-looking no trespassing private property sign. My sign on my land. I then walked back to my cabin, where the HOA committee stood waiting, completely confused. Mr. Henderson stormed up to me, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "What do you think you're doing? You can't block our office." I smiled the sweetest, most innocent smile I could manage. I held up the deed. "My office? Oh, you mean the building on my land?" I said, "According to this official county document, you're all trespassing." The look on his face was priceless. Pure shock, followed by spluttering anger. He started shouting about rules and regulations. I simply pointed at my sign. Rules are rules. I said, repeating his own words back to him. And one of those rules is you don't build your clubhouse on someone else's property without permission. They were stuck. Their cars were parked behind the building, now completely unreachable. Their files, their computers, everything was locked inside a building they no longer had legal access to. Of course, they called the police. When the officer arrived, I calmly handed over my deed and the property survey. He looked them over, glanced at the furious HOA members, and shrugged. "Sorry, folks," he said. "It's his land. This is a civil matter." He couldn't stop them from walking around my truck, but he confirmed they had no right to move it or enter the building. The next few days were incredible. I sat on my cabin porch with my coffee, watching the chaos unfold. They tried hiring a lawyer. I received a cease and desist letter, which I promptly used to start fire in my fireplace. Their lawyers quickly realized what they were dealing with. They had built illegally on land they didn't own. Their entire position was like a house of cards, and I had just pulled out the foundation. They had no access to their records, no place to meet, and their authority was collapsing. Finally, about a week later, a defeated-looking Mr. Henderson came up to my cabin, practically waving a white flag. Figuratively, of course. He wanted to negotiate. I let him wait a bit before agreeing to talk. My conditions were simple. First, they would issue a formal public apology and cancel the demolition order on my cabin. Second, my property would be permanently exempt from all current and future HOA rules and regulations. Third, they would dissolve the current board and hold fair new elections. And finally, they would have to buy the land their office sat on for me at a price I decided. Let's just say the final amount was a lot higher than what I paid at auction. Enough to cover legal fees, my time, my stress, and a very nice vacation. They had no choice but to agree to every single demand. The old board was gone, my cabin was safe, and my bank account looked a whole lot better. Sometimes the best defense isn't just fighting back. It's owning the ground your enemy stands on and making them pay for it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to stand up for yourself.